well, X, Y, and Z can never work because of A, B, and C. Well, I immediately started looking for people solving A, B, and C. Because while people are building businesses that have blind spots, the critics are pointing out the blind spots like at a much deeper level than the founders are. They're just assuming they'll solve them later. The critics think that they should be solved now. And so in there is all the opportunity.
All right. Alex Roy is the founder of Johnson & Roy Advisors, the Autonomous, the Drive, and the Human Driving Association. Roy set 7 Cannonball Run driving records in the ICE, EV, and 3-wheeled classes and worked at self-driving startup Argo AI for 4 years. He's the author of The Driver, producer of Apex, The Secret Race Across America, and chairman emeritus of the Moth Storytelling Series. And he's been investing in mobility startups since 2014. How are you doing today, Alex?
Harry Campbell, I feel great to be on your show, but I feel like your trajectory is even more interesting than mine.
Well, I don't know what
when I first met you, you were still driving. Well, whenever I meet anyone who's ever driven or thinking about driving for a ride hail, I'm like, have you heard of the rideshare guy? They're like, yeah, of course, like Harry Campbell. He's the guy. You're like the Jay Leno of mobility, like mobility tech.
Nice. I like that. That is a compliment. Jay Leno is a great guy. And, I'm excited to have you on because, I've had you on my Rideshare Guy podcast and we talked about mobility, and I've been on your podcast, the Autonomous, back in the day. And today we're going to do a little bit of a crossover episode. I thought it'd be cool because, one of my, I guess, I don't know if you would say passions, but one of the things I've been spending a bit of time on, as Colin knows, is investing in early stage startups. And you've been angel investing in mobility and have a ton of experience around AV, just interesting, unique startups. So this is sort of the crossover episode. And Colin, he kind of dabbles in mobility too, right, Colin?
Yeah, anything marketplace related, which has a bunch of things that drive and do cool or move, I should say. So,
anything that moves. How about that?
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, Alex, real quick, before we dig into the meat of the episode, talk a little bit about your angel investing career. How many investments have you made? I think you've done kind of a mix of funds and some companies, and you're advisor to companies too. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I am an LP in like Strux VC, Riley Brennan's fund. Good friends with like the guys from Many Mobility, like Granoff, and he just came back from Up Ventures. Although I don't think I'm big enough an investor to be an LP in any of the Up stuff.
We call those value add investors, Alex.
Yeah, I'm not even famous enough to qualify. But I've been investing since Tesla released Autopilot. As soon as that happened, I'm like, there's something, like there's more to this. I don't know enough. I know Tesla's not going to be the only company developing in sector. Like, who else is out there? That was just one approach to driver assistance and potentially autonomous vehicles. And so that was 2014. And at the time, I had been one of the co-founders of the Drive.com, which had been sold multiple times. And so at that point, the Drive was owned by Time Inc. And so I got, as one of the few co-founders who was kept on, a Time Inc. business card. And I thought, like, what is the best way to improve my deal flow? I am going to call every company that I feel has not been transparent and try to interview them and see what they say and just educate myself. And then I thought, well, why don't I go to startups, and with that business card, they'll take my call and interview them. And so that ended up being, for like 2 years, a fantastic way to get in the door and learn about the sector, and led to the creation of the Autonomous, which was phase 2 of my attempt to like create deal flow. And the Autonomous has been since then the spine of everything I've learned about the sector, all incoming deals, and a mountain of friendships. And in fact, just learning of you and meeting you is a perfect example of that. Back in 2017, 2017, unless you were a Tesla fanboy, there wasn't a lot of other content to read. And most analyst reports, I think, Harry, whether you know it or not, you are way more knowledgeable about like fundamentals of the sector than almost any analyst at a bank. And this is it. Like, you've got to teach yourself or listen to people who have taught themselves to be a great angel investor in any sector, but especially this one.
Yeah, interesting.
There's just too much hype.
And as you know, I'm an avid listener of the Autonocast. And, I guess to me, if someone asked me what the Autonocast podcast was about, I would say that it's three good friends who discuss the world of mobility. But I think there's also a clear focus on AV. It seems that, I think you guys cover most of the big news, the big developments there. Is that sort of your, I mentioned in your profile that you worked at Argo AI also for 4 years. Is that sort of what people think of you as, the AV guy, or is that kind of your niche, or is that what you're most excited about, or how do you think about that kind of space?
I mean, I'm most excited about driver assistance. I only joined Argo because of the Lane Hertzberg not accident, crash, which killed her with an Uber ATG vehicle back in 2018. So I, as a result, was stumbled into the AV sector because I was a known critic. And if going back in time, I'm glad I did. I'm glad I joined Argo, but I wish I had banged the drum louder for what I've been saying since 2015, which is that driver assistance and as yet unmanifested versions of it would be a much bigger market in the next 10, maybe even 20 years than AV itself. But I didn't know how to build a career around that. Nobody wanted to hear that in 2017.
For those who may not know, what's driver assistance mean?
So
you don't have your normal mobility expert listeners on this pod.
All right. So any vehicle every vehicle you could buy today has some form of driver assistance, or known as ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance System. And so anything that requires a driver to sit in the seat and do anything is a form of driver assistance. Anything that allows you to get out of the seat and sleep in the back, that's an autonomous vehicle. And anyone who tells you otherwise is either confused deliberately or by ignorance. In fact, I'd say that one of the biggest impediments to investing in driver assistance or any kind of self-driving or autonomy is that no one but the engineers talks about it in a clear manner. So press releases, news stories, media coverage is often so mangled that it just makes it harder to filter what might be innovative. And that's a big problem. Your question about the Autonocast and a focus on AV, it just happens to be AV has had the most hype and nonsense around it. Therefore, it's always a topic. And my co-host, Ed, has built his entire career around taking down Elon Musk, which oscillates between a focus on EV and range estimates and AV tech, which I think we all know that Tesla is you still have to sit in the seat, so it's not really self-driving.
Got it. I'm intrigued by you guys have both been in the space early and just watched it come. And I think I was more of a bystander watching Uber and really kind of coming at it from that perspective. But for you guys, if you look back, what were the hallmarks of what you considered the best investments in this space?
Well, I don't know if there's such thing as a best investment in anything related to self-driving yet, because the dominant company now, Waymo. Well, Waymo, you still can't buy shares. I mean, I guess indirectly if you bought Alphabet. Just the other day, a company that has been largely overlooked because it was raised much less money and has been a very smaller deployment, May Mobility, just announced $100 million Series D. So that's really interesting. I mean, full disclosure, May is a company in the Trucks.vc portfolio, so I'm indirectly an investor. May is really interesting because May, like another company, they do fixed route shuttles, autonomous shuttles, what's called level 4. And there are other companies that are kind of mid-level, kind of behind the scenes, like Gatik, which does like middle mile self-driving trucks. And they have a partnership with Walmart. No one talks about Gatik or May in the general media. It's just not. They're not the deployment scale or the fund. They haven't raised as much money, but they're literally trucking along, raising money, meeting milestones that were not as ambitious as the big companies, but they're meeting them. And they've received a little bit of, Gatik's got a clean bill of health. I think May's got a clean bill of health. These companies are going to become something.
I mean, 100 million is nothing to sneeze at, right?
Nothing to sneeze at. And so, think in the scale of the amount, like what Cruise has raised and Waymo in the billions or tens of billions. Gatik and May are just not a big deal. And yet, those are probably going to end up having been great investments for the early investors. I can tell you an investment that was good for me career-wise, but not great as an investor was in how many years ago was this? 18? I can't remember. There was a rush of simulation startups, and very few have survived. And many of them were like sector vertical focused. So a great founder is a guy named Warren Honor. Have you met him, Harry? No. Do you know Warren? Warren is in the circle of, he's an engineer. He was at Ford for years. He knows a ton about security and a ton about AV and driver assistance and sensor hardware. So he had a simulation startup, and he explained to me something that no analyst or journalist was capable of explaining, which is that not all simulation is the same. Everybody, every AV developer and every OEM needs simulation to know if the suite of hardware sensors and the software behind them can function. And if something bad happens, you hit something or someone, you want that to happen in simulation. So the quality of the simulation matters. And it made sense 6 years ago to invest in a simulation startup that had a profound technical advantage. Their fidelity, another word for accuracy, was just higher. And so I put money into this company called, oh my God, it's completely spacing the name of the company. Warren was the founder. They were called Right Hook.
Warren's company, let's call it that.
Great simulation stuff. It was called Right Hook. And it was brilliant guys, brilliant tech. They didn't have maybe the media narrative or hype that some other simulation companies had. And to Warren's credit, you don't see this often among startups, when he saw the writing on the wall, there would not be a big exit. And he came close. He returned the remaining investor money and sold the remaining company, and is still running it as part of the buyer. But he's a great founder. And what was fascinating about that is that all these years later, it's clear that they should have survived and they should have exited to one of these AV companies like Cruise, which is in the news lately, because it is clear that the quality of simulation matters deeply. And the analysts, and we just have no optics into the quality of the simulation at these AV companies. There's just very little transparency at all. And so
sounds like some of these companies could have maybe used a few more simulations before hitting the road, huh?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever I look at an AV company, I'm always curious to know, do they build or buy? Yeah. And what are they simming? Like how well are they simming? And what is their simulation missed?
What do you think about investing? I mean, one thing I think that's interesting, right, with the media side and your Autonocast podcast, you guys are kind of covering what's hot, right? Like what's in the news, and also maybe like what's even like overhyped. Like AVs, I think, have obviously, are a perfect example of an industry that's had like, I think 2 hype cycles now, right? There was like this early hype cycle and then it died down. And then now there's like another hype cycle going on now that they're hitting the road. And so I would imagine that you probably get a lot of people, who are kind of in that space because they're listening to you, they're reaching out to you maybe with ideas. So like, what do you think about investing in these hyped up sectors? Do you think that kind of like biases the things you're looking at, or do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? What are your thoughts?
The hype is terrible and it wastes all our time of anyone who's serious.
But it's great for a media business, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the Autonocast is not ever meant to be like a cash flow positive thing. It literally wasn't an LLC until quite recently, and we're 6 years in. The most valuable part of podcasting in sector, in terms of finding good investments or just trying to find investments, has been to get critics on, like Luddite anti-tech folks on, to come on and say, well, X, Y, and Z can never work because of A, B, and C. Well, I immediately start looking for people solving A, B, and C. Because while people are building businesses that have blind spots, the critics are pointing out the blind spots like at a much deeper level than the founders are. The founders are usually they're just assuming they'll solve them later. The critics think that they should be solved now. And so in there is all the opportunity. A great example would be Audi announced years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, that they were going to, the Audi A8, their big sedan, they were going to offer what's called an L3 autonomous highway pilot. So you could basically a hands-off system for driving on the highway. And they had a big media push, and tons of critics came out of the woodwork. Tons. Oh, that can never work. It's dangerous, it's unsafe. So I started poking around the system. Well, it was missing something. It was missing something that doesn't have an engineering title name yet, but I'll call it a transition management system. A system for knowing if the driver is ready to put their hands back on the wheel, if they fall asleep, or if they're watching a movie, or any number of things. Audi didn't have one, or not. They never announced if they had one or not. But a few months later, they very quietly canceled the consumer release of that product. So that was years ago. Recently, Mercedes-Benz announced an L3 highway pilot system. Big fanfare, the first such system to pass German regulatory approval, and it's going to work in the United States, in a couple of states, yada, yada. Literally the same people were like, well, that can never work. Where's their train? How do you monitor the driver? And Mercedes' response is that they have a camera that looks at the driver that evaluates their ability to do so. But Philip Koopman, who's a professor in sector, who's a great critic of safety of all these companies, he pointed out that the manual for that car, the Mercedes-Benz, states the driver's got to pay attention, which means it's not really a driverless system. So what my takeaway from all of this is, and this was clear 6 years ago, I want to invest in a startup that develops IP around the accurate measurement of human attention in a moving car, such that they can take over if they're given an alert. Like, where is it? Where is that startup? Because every OEM is doing it differently. There's no consensus of what it should be. And if someone had a great set of IP around that, you'd print cash forever. I still haven't found that company. Everyone says, don't worry, someone else is working on it. Well, I haven't found that someone else. And there are probably 20 more examples of this. So I love hearing critics come on a podcast, mine or anyone's, and hearing what they say, because whatever they're pointing out, that's the opportunity every time.
Got it. Colin, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, my light bulbs are going off. I think that's a great insight. Just generally,
actually the idea I came up with while you were talking, Alex, was like a virtual or a physical hand that comes out and slaps you to wake you up. But something, that is the idea. But something like that,
or a foul smell. What was the other one recently I saw? Yeah, but it just never ends because the critics will never go away. Innovation will never go away. So why ignore them? Like they're like they're a fountain of value creation.
Yeah. Well, switching gears for just a second, and on the critics, a company that's had a lot of critics. We've mentioned Tesla a couple of times. What do you think about investing in Tesla?
I have some Tesla. I don't discuss it, but no one ever asks. I've never shorted Tesla. I've owned Tesla probably 3 different times in the last 9 years. Look, have you read the Isaacson book? Either of you?
I haven't. The new one?
Yeah. So, the TLDR is don't bet against this guy. He's a very long-term thinker. He's relentless. And it's hard to beat relentless people. So, one of the big secrets of AV, and Musk, as he sees this, is that if the big stack, expensive AV companies, Waymo, Cruise, Motional, anyone who's building a company where they have multiple sensors, LiDAR, radar, everything, and with a deep focus on safety, to their credit, if those companies went away, or if they didn't exist, what would the future of self-driving look like? We're there now, because if Cruise goes away because of this most recent debacle, that leaves just Waymo, the big dog, and a couple of medium players. I have no insight into this and no proprietary information, but from a markets and culture standpoint, if competition is reduced because Cruise goes away, then Waymo has the field to themselves, and then Alphabet, their parent, they're always under pressure to cut costs. They could just say to Waymo, hey, we're going to cut the budgets. You're still rolling, but we can slow the roll because we don't have a player of our scale out there anymore. If that happens, that cedes time to Mobileye and Tesla, who are both developing AV tech. I mean, Tesla's vision only, and Mobileye is vision plus. They have two stacks: vision plus lidar and radar, and they merge them together. But fundamentally, the AV race has never been between the companies, but between theses. It's between vision only or vision primary, funded by revenues from operating businesses with other streams. So Tesla sells cars, Mobileye sells hardware, and they're profitable. That's one set. And then the other side is everyone funding out of VC dollars. Mm-hmm. Those are the two theses. Nothing to do with the tech itself. And so if Cruise goes away and it's just Waymo, and if Waymo should slow their rollout, then another reality comes into play, which is the vision only or vision first guys will eventually come out with something which is self-driving at the time, whatever you want to call it, autonomous, driverless. It will have a different set of behaviors, or let me say, they'll have a different standard for what safety is, because they have fewer sensors, so they have to develop more compute and other aspects of the system to deploy, which means that there is going to be a lot more innovation to come. Because what do you need if you're a big stack sensor, multiple mode company? You need to get those things smaller and cheaper fast. Those companies need to buy startups or invest in startups that are doing miniaturization of hardware, that are doing things with less compute, that are doing, compute at the edge, a universe of stuff. Without that stuff, the multimodal companies don't survive in a market where time is against them. And so I'm always looking at sensor companies. Even today, there are still sensor companies being started that are doing interesting things. And so, I mean, the cliche is that the biggest opportunities when the market's the worst. Totally true. Yeah. No one thinks AV is going to happen, but everything developed for AV has applications downstream in driver assistance and also in micromobility.
It seems like and look, I don't know anything about this space at all, I'm realizing, but it seems like everything is investing at the like kind of the platform level right now, and like the tooling level rather than the application level, which I think is, I get that the application may be like self-driving just in and of itself, right? Like you're not having to drive, but that isn't necessarily outside of selling a vehicle that could do that. Like isn't much of a commercial application outside of that. Like what are the things that get enabled by this? And so I'm intrigued by like what you think are like the second order investments to come like out of this. Like, let's say, I think it's assumed it will work eventually, right? It's just, will it take longer than people think? Probably. But now what's next out of this? Like once all the sensors are in place, once all the technology's there, what's the big bang here?
Well, there are applications that are working now in construction and things like that with like limited design. ODDs means operational design domain, limited structured environments. There's businesses there already, and those are growing. On the other side, in my consulting work, I've just taken on my first set of clients outside transportation that are in parallel verticals. So directly adjacent is construction. And so my thesis is that 3D printed walls, we've heard there's companies out there doing 3D printing, there's 3D printed wall companies, and that got a lot of hype too. And those companies are analogous to like limited drive, like automatic, like emergency braking. They're doing very little. What does a 3D printed wall comprise of, like the actual labor of a house? Less than 10% of the work. So if you automate less than 10% of a task, let's say you do it twice as well as legacy approaches, you've only taken 5% off the time to build a house. That doesn't move the needle. Like self-driving, you want to automate as much as you can. And so I have a client called Diamond Age, shameless plug, I love these guys. And so they're trying to automate as much of construction as possible. And the market is for affordable homes. Why is this interesting to me? Is because the guys doing it came out of Tesla. So their experience from Tesla, it's the guy who was running General Assembly, his name is Russell Verone, founded this company. Because he's like, okay, we know from Tesla what too much automation can do, which is it introduces new problems, more maintenance, and more cost. There's an optimal amount of automation for any complex task. And so they have built this portable factory. They put in a foundation with multiple robots on it that automates 27% of construction, eventually 55, eventually 90. But where it becomes interesting, and this is where second order effects and adjacent verticals matter. We talk about last mile delivery in cities. Harry, you talk about delivery all the time.
Yeah.
Eventually, last mile will come to building materials. There will be vehicles that may or may not be autonomous, but they will have building materials on board that will have some method of interacting with what the Diamond Age guys have, which is a portable factory. It's like the size of a house. It's a little bit bigger than a house, and it sits on the slab. And when it's done, it moves to the next slab. But what does the supply chain look like for them? It's 100 years old. A bunch of dudes show up with a pickup truck with stuff, and they pick it up, they move it over to the site, and they drop it off. And then different guys feed it to the automated construction engine, which builds the house faster. So to close the loop on automating home construction, which is a real problem in this country, we need more homes. You need to apply the same hardware and software to different parts of the loop. Because the building of the house is this much, but the circle is like this. From the moment the things get to Home Depot, get loaded from Home Depot onto a truck to get to the site. That's a whiteboard. Where are the startups working on the rest of it?
Yeah.
And I'm always looking for those. So all these sensors matter. They matter across verticals. And there's so little cross-pollination that you often find that the same problem is being solved in different verticals by companies that don't know each other.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I really like the
there's
word
a failure
you
of imagination.
Yeah, I really like the word you used, parallel, right? Like you're sort of looking at these opportunities that, are like construction and AVs on the surface might not seem like they have a ton in common, right? But I often tell people, like with my fund that I'm investing out of, I look for adjacent opportunities, right? If it's like rideshare or gig economy, you probably have to pay me to get me involved in the company, right? But if it's something where, truck driving, I'm not an expert in truck driving, but like, hey, they're all owner operators. They have sort of that similar P&L, right? They have all the same challenges, the last mile, first mile, last mile issues, picking up and dropping off, right? It's kind of the same concepts. I like that, kind of adjacent industries. So along that line of thinking, I totally just made up this game right now. I'm going to give you a few buzzwords, Alex, and verticals, and you sort of tell me what you think quickly. Good investment, bad investment. Colin, if you want to throw any into at the end, and then we'll expand on one or two of them. How does that sound? I just made up this game, so it could go well, it could go poorly.
Guys, I'm just going to tell you, I'm probably going to say I don't know because
no,
I know.
Ready?
It's a lot.
Okay, some are going to be fun.
I like this game.
All right, ready. Number one, space tech. Good investment, bad investment.
Good investment.
Hyperloop.
Do you want me to say? No.
Okay. My last one, eVTOL, electric vehicle takeoff and landing. These are like these drones that fly around and are gonna,
Oh,
TikTok.
Well, I'm going to say yes. I'll say yes with a caveat, which is eVTOL. A drone is eVTOL, a little one,
Yeah.
And so is a big one. It's a big term. So yes-ish.
Yes-ish. All right, Colin, you have any to add?
Yeah. Mobility secondaries.
Yeah. Yes. For sure.
So that would be what, Colin? Like, you mean investing in a secondary of a company?
Yeah, some of these guys have done like some big amounts of raising.
Like May Mobility just raised $100 million if they were allowing people to buy secondaries of these types of companies.
Yeah, I guess like Cruise and all these guys at Waymo, you can't really get access, like you said, they're public.
So the thing is, if it was a secondary in Waymo today, I would totally go in because they're clearly the leader. They have mountains of good hardware and software. And and let's imagine, I mean, I can't imagine it, but let's imagine Alphabet pulled the plug. I just can't see it. There were so much value would be unlocked. So many subsets of that company are incredible that there's value all the way to the end to end of Waymo for sure. And whereas if you can't say that about Cruise today, because we just don't know, we don't have faith. Who does? It sucks, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, Colin, you're in Austin. You've seen these Cruise vehicles popping around.
Yeah.
So Cruise, Alex, not a buy. You're bearish.
Yeah, I'm bearish, but I'd be bearish even if even if they showed up in 6 months and with tech that was great. Let's imagine there was a transparent metric where you could compare their tech with someone else's. Even then, I wouldn't buy it because optics, like Marcom, like vibe of a company, like if Waymo's in the same city, which one are you getting into?
Yeah.
Same price.
I sort of, I think there were a lot of jokes about Cruise, they're getting stopped, they're like having trouble, they're piling up at intersections in San Francisco and, they're going slow in Austin. I mean, I saw a couple and like, I guess I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to realize like they've got a few bugs, that they're working out. And then of course they had this big issue and, sort of bad optics around how they handled it. And it's like, I don't know, man, that's kind of scary that you could raise billions of dollars and then sort of, do you think this is like they're done or they're going to have a big uphill battle? What lessons can be learned for,
I think
younger founders, younger startup folks from this whole Cruise debacle?
When I talk to, so Kyle Votes, he's not stupid. He's brilliant. He is. But when, so the IQ of a founder must be high. You can't skip that. It's not possible. That's table stakes. But the EQ has to be proportional to the market in which one wants to sell. And people who criticize Silicon Valley are often criticizing what the gap between technical capability and the EQ that's missing from the leadership. Mm-hmm. And in that way, the critics are correct. High EQ in a founder is equivalent to a shortcut to scaling because it cuts out of the way massive amount of friction to scale. For example, Brian Selesky, the founder of Argo AI, set aside that Argo didn't raise the money it needed to and it shut down. But until that shutdown point, Argo avoided all the friction that Cruise invited. Mm-hmm. So Argo went to cities where there was demand, where there was no cultural or political opposition ready to roll against them. And so a shorter path to scaling, Miami, great city. Boston, pretty good. San Francisco, terrible. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at a founder it doesn't matter what they're doing, I always ask, I'm like, okay, if your product worked perfectly, what stands in the way of you deploying it? If the product is perfect. And this is where eVTOL has an issue. Because first, we don't yet know, like no one's ever seen, I've never seen real data around the safety of passenger carrying eVTOL. I think it's solvable. So let's put that aside. What remains? Well, it's a common belief among all leadership of tech companies, or all companies, especially tech companies. If you hire a policy team will solve that. If there's any opposition, they'll write a check, make it go away. And policy teams' job is regulatory capture. And they think if they've got regulations that favor them, they're done. You're not done. You're not done because, again, that's table stakes. If your product operates in an urban environment. So I've heard from many city leaders, going back years, I've heard people we know, Harry, state that eVTOL will deploy over my city, over my dead body.
Yeah.
I've heard it from leaders in LA. I've heard it in San Francisco. So you want to defeat that, you need to come with a multi-year strategy of engagement prior to testing that thing in the air. And it has to be more than writing checks to local, charities.
Yeah.
You've got to really go to town and be like laser focused. So when I talk to a founder, I want to hear that they're capable of thinking like that up front. And the lesson of the money I lost in that simulation startup is this. Every AV company in the world has a big simulation bench, and they simulate a vehicle going down the street, how well it sees people and kids and other cars, and that's how it plans. But none of these companies are simulating the system into which they're trying to sell product. The system is the city. And you don't even need a simulator to know that San Francisco has communities of people who will oppose you no matter what you're building, even if it's good.
Yeah.
And no one thought to anticipate cones by putting the hoods of cruise vehicles. That's a failure of imagination. And if I was looking at Cruise 10 years ago, I would have asked, what do you think your biggest risk factor is? And if they didn't say the people on the ground in this city, I would never have written a check.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good lesson for founders, because obviously there's always a sort of thought, what's the first city that I want to deploy in, and what is the next set of cities that we're going to expand to, right? That's always on, the decks. And I think that a lot of people focus more on the business opportunity, right? Like I've worked with companies like, hey, let's do some testing to see what the acquisition costs in these 5 different cities are, so we can, potentially launch in the one that has lower, right, where the demand is. But I don't think people I always hate, especially in startups, I think it's sometimes very unfair to look back and say like, wow, that was the dumbest idea. It never was going to work. But I don't know. I'm looking back and like, who thought it was a good idea to launch Cruise in San Francisco? It seems like a pretty stupid idea.
The thesis was that it's one of the hardest cities in the country, tied with Boston or New York. And if you could succeed there, you can succeed anywhere. But you have to then mitigate the risks that come with that. The risks were not like technical. I mean, they're technical, sure, but the other risk.
Yeah,
if
that's
cruise
a good point.
AVs worked perfectly today, there would still be opposition to them, because opposition is it's not just to an autonomous vehicle, which is a jobs component, or autonomous vehicle for safety. It's for existing.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Like, if you are going to launch in San Francisco, it's kind of, I think, it's okay to have that sort of in mind. And hey, this is going to be a huge challenge and reason, but it's like, what could go wrong? And like, who can you get on your side? I actually saw Waymo release this really cool video yesterday that sort of showed how their technology, like, I think it actually warns the passenger, like, not to open the door, may even lock the door if they notice a bicyclist approaching, which is kind of similar. Uber will send a push notification if you're on a highly trafficked bike street, but you can still open the door and nail a biker. And for bike, people that ride bikes, this is called dooring. This is a huge issue for them. So I could imagine, like, hey, if you're an AV company, you're coming to launch in San Francisco, all those bikers may not love you, but if you kind of go and say like, hey, here's one of the here's like the top 5 features that we're going to be bringing, and kind of like get them on your side from the get-go, somewhat like a group who may have opposed you, now they're going to be kind of on your side. I think that makes sense.
You're 2,000% correct.
I think the interesting thing is that, I think when just from building startups is like, I always like push people to the like greenfield opportunity, like the easier set. Like, where do you sell most easily, right? So almost picking like the hardest spot to go is like counterintuitive in my mind, just as like an entry strategy. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like, I guess take a market like Austin, right? Where so it's funny you brought up Cruise. The other day I was like picking up my son from school, and this one came around the corner and it was like inching at me, like trying to get in, and we were all in line to pick up. And I was like, I took a video of it, and I was like, I don't know what this thing is.
Like, come on, bro.
It just was like, like inching towards me, like slower. And I was like, I think this thing might hit me. It didn't end up hitting me, but it was like at least, I don't know, it was like a foot away at most. But I still find it interesting about all this is the application side of it, right? Basically, they're going with ride sharing because that was kind of like, I just thinking maybe it felt obvious of the way to do this, or like the most proof, like the best proof point of it. But I still struggle with the idea that like this is like a problem searching for an application, right? Like, is it like, and I know there is applications, right? And maybe we don't know it. It's kind of like the iPhone, maybe when it originally came out, like we just don't know what it unlocks. But I guess I'm straight. That's where I'm like, and thinking of investability in the space, I just keep thinking about what, like what's the there with business? Like what business happens out of this? Like what gets created value wise?
Well, I mean, there are obvious small ones like automated parking payments. This is a small thing and yet still not solved, but there are people trying to solve it. Automated parking, if that would work. Does anyone sell a car that could park itself reliably? I've never seen it. And yet, wouldn't everybody want that? Sure. Requires all the same hardware for self-driving, except it only has to do a few things. There's one that very much closer to, I think about a lot when I listen to the Rideshare Guy podcast, which is, all right, if at some point Tesla and someone else, probably powered by Mobileye, will offer privately owned vehicles capable of some autonomy, driverless operation. So at that point, we have to start talking about dual mode vehicles. The vehicle I drive somewhere, maybe I don't drive it, it's mine, and then I get to work, and what happens? The fantasy that has been sold, and no one has seen this come to fruition, is that your car will go park itself somewhere. But Elon's thesis is that your car will make you money while you're not driving it. So since Musk has said that any Tesla that is ever used in a robotaxi network must be on the Tesla platform, the Tesla network, which means, now here's where the opportunity comes in, which means that a network like Turo is perfectly positioned to become a rival to Uber, Lyft, and Tesla. Because if I had a Tesla, if I had anything, a non-Tesla capable of any autonomy, I would put it on the Turo. I would put it on Turo for rent by the day or for robotaxi by the minute. So if Turo could close that circle, so for that to work, you now need, there are these fleet management platforms used. I mean, Harry, I forget what they're called. There's a few folks out there who do these management platforms for people who manage multiple Turos or multiple ride-hail vehicles they rent out. So someone is going to start a new platform or a plugin for an existing platform, which helps manage these robotaxi fleets, plugged into anything in Turo or something else. We haven't seen this yet, but we can see the contours of it. And that network that startup would have to do something that Waymo and Cruise do, but Tesla does not, which is customer assistance. You get into Waymo or Cruise, there's a problem, you can call somebody. But Tesla, even if they develop robotaxi, doesn't have a call center. And a third party's got to build that business, offering call center support to Tesla for their Tesla network, or for people who crowd provide vehicles to a rival network for some future robotaxi fleet. We haven't seen any of this yet, but it's inevitable. And so I'm always looking for startups that are going to solve problems that have not quite percolated, so I could be the first guy in or the second guy.
Very cool. Well, I know we touched on a lot today, a lot of AVs. If folks want to learn more, listen from you, I think we'll leave a link to your podcast, the Autonicast. And I think Twitter is your most active platform. Does that sound about right?
It is.
Where can people find you?
And
learn from you.
Alex Roy. I'm Alex Roy 144 on all platforms. Wait, can I plug my business? Can I plug my?
Do it. I mean, you've already plugged it like 5 times. So what's another? Keep going.
Well, let me say this. I hate consultants. I hate them because they always look for long-term contracts and they'll delay and postpone. It's all foreplay, and it's just, there's not a lot of value there.
Colin's a consultant, just FYI.
If you would like to hear, wait, Colin, but you're not with McKinsey or any of these guys, right?
No.
If you would
Solo guy,
unfiltered advice that I can deliver in usually 1 hour, but I'll stretch it out to 3 months if you like. That's the limit of my engagement. Johnson and Roy is the mobility advisory for you.
Ooh, I like that pitch. That is a pitch. I'm going to have to check these prices, see if I can afford it. Awesome, Alex. Well, I appreciate you coming on and chatting all things AV, mobility, investing, and we'll do it again soon.
Thank you for having me on, Harry. I'm your biggest fan.